All right, so good morning, Hack, on this rainy morning, at least where I am. I'm now recording, and today we're going to continue our talk about biological perspective of psychology. We did a brief little check-in with everybody, and I thank everybody for participating in that. What I'd like to do today is continue our talk. Last time that we met, we discussed the neurotransmitters and the chemicals and the chemical interactions and how the neurons connect everything together throughout our body and into our brains, and transmit and receive signals constantly, right? Today, we're going to talk about areas of the brain that specialize in certain functions, okay? With that, what I would like to do is maybe break us off into groups of, looks like we got enough to do, maybe groups of two. So what I'll do is I'll break you off in groups of two, and I'll check in with your group, and I'm going to assign you areas of the brain. So if you can all write down just something quick here, what I'll be looking for, and when I pop into your group, I'll give you the area of the brain that you have, what the area does, and I'll give you the area, where it's located, and an interesting fact about it. And that could be what happens when it's damaged, if there's an illness that strikes, what are the symptoms, that sort of thing. And you can look that up in your book. If you have the physical textbook, it's right around, I think it starts in chapter 2, page 72 on up. Yeah, so it's right past what we talked about with neurotransmitters and imaging if you're in the Revel book. So I'm going to go ahead and break you off into groups of two. Hopefully, I think we have enough to do two. We might have to throw somebody into a third group, but that's okay. I'll figure that here in a minute. All right. All right. And see, I have two people that I'm going to have to move to different rooms. All right, so I'll see you in your groups here in just a minute and give you your assignment. Lauren, did you join your group? There you go.
Hey, go back to us individually.
All right, got a couple more seconds. Wait for everybody to join in here. Great. Okay. All right. So I think we got everybody back. So we'll get to your sections here in just a little bit. So I want to give you a little introduction to the brain. So one of my favorite ways to look at the brain is from an evolutionary psychologist perspective. So what function does it have? And if you read through chapter 1, you'll probably recall functionalism, which is the idea that every behavior we have or every area of our brain or neuronic path has some kind of function. And that's how I like to look at the brain, okay? And as you probably discovered when you're going through these areas, that each area does something a little bit different. Now, there's really a misconception that if we take out one part of the brain, it cannot recover. And when we get into like some developmental delays or any kind of physical injuries to the brain, we'll discover that we have a thing called plasticity, which helps our brain to rewire, especially at a young age. Because remember, we have about 200 billion neurons that we're born with. So if something happens earlier on in infancy or early childhood, our brains can kind of compensate for that. And it's really cool how it does that. So for example, if there's if one of the temporal lobes is not functioning correctly, or there's damage to that, the other side of it will pick up, or maybe another area of the brain will pick up the slack and create at least close to full functionality with that. So the brain is really, really cool and really resilient. But from, as I started to say, from evolutionary perspective, we look at the brain as kind of layers, okay? And within the inner core of our brain, and I'll bring this up on my screen so I can demonstrate. Oops. All right. So if you look at our brain, can everybody see that? So at the very base of our brain, we have our, I was hoping to be able to draw on this, I can't. You have your base of your spine here. Now this connects, this is a really closely grouped band of fibers that come up from your spine and just branch out into the rest of your brain, okay? So behind that, you have the hindbrain. So everything underneath here, this would be considered the inner brain or lower brain. Now, what's interesting about that is just about every mammal, and not just mammals, invertebrates, reptiles, they have a very similar brain structure when we look at the hindbrain and lower brain, okay? Because they contain the amygdala, they contain the hippocampus, they contain things that it's necessary for them to survive and reproduce. What they don't have is this outer layer. So our cerebral cortex, which is the outer brain, as you can see, it has different folds in it. That is actually kind of an overgrowth. Those wrinkles, that's not by design. It's that our brain expands so much through our lives, through our growth period, that it starts to collapse in on each other. So that's where those wrinkles come from. But anyway, the further out you go from the center of the brain to the outside, the more advanced we get as humans. With our decision making, with our communication skills, right? We see that with judgment, with emotions, with our behaviors. We're very calculated creatures. So really, there's not a lot of difference between our inner brain and animals. But when we go out to the cerebral cortex, we see a lot more higher functioning abilities. Okay. So that's basically the brain in a nutshell, no pun intended, okay? So let's kind of go through from each group. Hopefully you remember which group you're in. I'm just gonna call you off by number and tell me where, what area of the brain you found, where it is, and I'll show you on here. I was hoping to be able to draw on here, but it doesn't look like that's gonna happen. So go ahead, group one, what did you have? Group one, do you remember who you were? Ugh.
The cerebellum.
What's that?
Cerebellum.
Cerebellum, okay. What's the cerebellum do?
It's involved with the muscle coordination and balance.
With the, I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. One more time.
The muscle coordination and balance.
Okay, muscle coordination and balance, right? You can see right here, okay? This is your cerebellum. So I showed you where it's located. How about something interesting about it?
When scientists removed the part of that brain from animals, they became clumsy and their coordination and balance was off.
So the cerebellum, as you can see, it just has these wrapped fibers, and it looks very similar to what you're seeing in this picture. But again, this is what just about every animal that's able to, that's mobile and able to move, has the cerebellum. And it helps them to move, it helps them to balance, it helps them to feel like if they're moving, how they can adjust to that. So that's the function of it, right? But again, pay attention to where it's located and how that's situated. Okay, very good. All right, who's group 2? What did you have?
We had the hypothalamus.
Hypothalamus. Okay, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
We're learning how to pronounce these. That's okay. All right.
So what that is, so like it's the central region of the human brain, like formed by nervous fibers.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so like what its functions are is like it releases hormones and regular body temperature. We did find one fact about it. Well, and another person found another, but the one I found was it plays a role in the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which is part of any emotional reaction.
Right. So, okay, sympathetic nervous system. Remember, we talked about that on Monday, and that's responsible for what? Does anybody remember it? Begins with an F. Keep it PG. Does anybody remember? Fight or flight? Ring any bells? Okay. So fight or flight response. So if we get angry or if we get anxious, our sympathetic nervous system fires up and deals with that, right? Now, one interesting fact about the hypothalamus. So it is, there are two ways that it activates, either through our cerebral cortex, which means our decision making, or it's hardwired into certain bodily functions, like Mitch talked about. It could be our temperature, right? These are very survivalistic functions. Our pituitary, which is responsible for what? Reproduction, right? That's a very basic need. That's a survivalist. Something that every species and being needs to do in order to perpetuate their genes. Okay. All right. Good job. Group 3, what did you have?
We had the amygdala.
Oh, that's a fun one. So what'd you find out about the amygdala?
It allows you to process and feel emotions.
Yeah. So what did you find interesting about that?
It's actually named after the Greek word amygdala, which means almond because it's almond shaped.
Mm-hmm.
And the location is in the frontal portion of the temporal lobe.
Okay. All right. And as you can see right here, can you all see, I know my video cut out last time. Is it moving? Can you see the brain moving?
Yeah.
Okay, so very small little almond-shaped things right here on the inner side of the brain. Now, make no mistake about it. I mean, as little as these things are, they are very, very powerful in regulation of emotion. Actually, not regulation, emotional reaction to things. So when we see something, like if we talk about our fear response, what happens is it goes into our brain, we process that image, our hypothalamus reacts to that, and it tells us, hey, do we need to act automatically here, or do we need to send this information to our cerebral cortex so we can process this a little bit better? And then our amygdala activates to produce whatever response we need to produce to either fight off that evil or that foe, or run away from it. Okay, so your amygdala is very, important in your fight or flight as well. Okay, good job. All right, group, I forgot what group. Was that group 3?
Yeah.
All right, group 4, what do you have? Group 4.
The hippocampus.
Hippocampus. All right. That's a fun one too. What'd you find out about the hippocampus?
It helps in the formation of memory, and it's in how we learn and how we like respond like with emotions.
Okay.
We have, I believe we have 2, and they're on each side of the cerebral cortex.
Mm-hmm. Okay, as you can see here.
Sorry about my dogs. And they're also, like, the fun fact we found was they're named after seahorses for similar shape, like looking sideways.
Okay, that's interesting. I knew that at one point. I don't think I've heard that in many, many years, but okay, that's good.
We also found if there's any damage to the hippocampus, you could experience diseases like Alzheimer's and like memory loss.
Mm-hmm. All right, very good. So one thing about the hippocampus, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get into memory and learning, but it is responsible, and look at its location. So it's right in between the inner brain and the hindbrain and the cerebral cortex, isn't it? So this is important to know where this location is, because it also is closely located with what? What are those little almond-like things we just talked about? The amygdala, right? So what that tells us is that not only is it important that we do the processing and executive functioning in our cerebral cortex, but it also helps us to manage our motor skills and regulate our emotions as well. When we think, and again, when we get into memory and learning, we're not a hard drive. We don't exactly have a hard drive going on in our head that's recording ones and zeros and images, okay? We think very much in symbols and emotions. And if you think back to the time of your life or an event that happened that got you either really scared or really happy, you remember those. You remember those moments really vividly, don't you? Because you're assigning emotion to that, and that's because of its location. Also, we didn't really talk about it. I guess we'll talk about it when we get to senses, and I'll bring this up again. It's also co-located right here in between them with your olfactory bulb. Now, your olfactory bulb does what? What are your olfactory senses? Does anybody know? Anybody want to take a guess?
I want to say smell, but I think that's wrong.
You are 100% correct. It is smell. You're right. So it's related to our taste and our sense of smell. How many of you, just show of hands, can remember maybe grandfather's cologne or grandma's cooking? Okay, you can smell that. And what happens when you smell something similar to that? What happens to your memory? What do you do?
We remember the person, right?
Yeah. You remember the person. You get a rush of memories into your head, and that's because of where it's located. Now, if you think about that in survival terms, why would that be important? Why is our sense of smell and taste important to us for survival purposes?
Well, we could remember food or potential predators based on smell.
Right. Biological needs, right? We need to survive. And to do that, we need to be able to eat. So if we eat something that's really bad for us, we're going to remember that. And by show of hands, how many of you have gotten sick off of after eating something, and it may not have had anything to do with what you ate, but you had like an after effect? You weren't able to smell or taste that item again, right? I've done that. I've gotten sick after eating something. It was months. Orange juice, of all things. I couldn't smell or taste orange juice for almost 6 months after that. It just made me nauseous again. But that's built in to our memory for survival purposes. Absolutely. All right. Sorry, I know I tend to go off on tangents here. All right, group 5, what did you have?
The frontal lobe.
Frontal lobe. Okay, what did you find out about the frontal lobe?
That it controls like our memory and our motor functions, like problem solving.
Yeah, okay. All right, and as you can see, this is where it's located. The left side, I believe it's the left side of your screen, at least it is for me, is the front of your brain, right? Hence frontal lobe. And the right side is going to be the back, which we'll talk about here a little bit. So what interesting fact did you come up with?
That like a long-term effect of like an injury can be like personality changes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Like, what's his name? Like Phineas Gage, is that his name? We got like
Yeah.
in his head.
Yeah. What'd you find out about Phineas Gage?
Just that like he was like working on something and then like a metal bar stuck in his head.
He made a railroad spike go directly through his brain, and then he survived it. And then they did like lots of studies on the like causes of damage.
Yeah. Yeah. So Phineas Gage, thank you for bringing that up. I was actually I was gonna mention that. So Phineas Gage was it was a historic event. But prior to Phineas Gage, we believed in a thing called phrenology. Now, phrenology is a concept that areas of your brain, it's very rudimentary to what we know now, but back in the turn of the century, we thought that certain bumps in the brain meant that those areas were developed, which meant that you could predict somebody's personality or how they're going to behave or their intelligence, so on and so forth. For example, if you had a nodule on the right side of your brain, that meant that you're, and they were very close, that your speech, you were somebody that was able to speak well and articulate things very well. So they weren't very far off with some of these ideas. However, Phineas Gage kind of blew that out of the water when he was a foreman on one of the jobs, and he sustained an injury where the spike went through and punctured his frontal lobe. Very well spoken, very intelligent man, and he survived. And for the most part, he was very much intact. However, what happened to him was he was not able to regulate his emotions as well anymore. He wasn't able to make decisions very well. So a lot of things happen with executive functioning, and that's because of the frontal lobe. Okay, the frontal lobe is kind of our processing center. And if you think in terms of computers, it's more like your CPU. It switches things. It's constantly routing things. It's your executive functioning for your entire brain. And where that's important when we get into emotions and stress is how information gets into our frontal lobes and then tries to process through our amygdala and our hippocampus, and it tells us what to remember and what to forget. Okay, so very instrumental in that. Now, another interesting fact that I want you to keep in mind, especially when we get into developmental psychology, and hopefully we will have time for addiction, but the frontal lobe continues to develop throughout our adolescent years and well into our 20s. How many of you knew that? Did anybody know that? So why is that important to understand when we think of child development and adolescence? Our brain is still developing, right? The rest of your brain is pretty much formed at adolescent years. But if the frontal lobe is still growing, we got to be very careful as far as understanding that adolescents, teenagers may not be able to make decisions similar to what adults do. You know, some might be a little bit more apt to making more mature decisions, but on the whole, their brains are still developing. So any kind of chemical interference could negatively impact the functioning, long-term functioning of that person's brain. So drugs, alcohol, those things we know interfere with processing. That could be a problem, right? And we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that when we get into developmental delays or developmental disorders. Okay. All right. Good job. Did I hear somebody trying to ring in?
I just said that explains so much.
Okay. For those of you who have teenagers, you can share this with them. Your frontal lobe isn't quite developed yet, so no, you can't go party.
Professor, I have a silly question.
Yes, nothing silly in this class.
Yeah. Okay. I heard in common version that people who had a big front head have the ability to develop, a quite big, faster understanding and solving problem than those who have a small front head. Is that what's your appreciation about it?
Well, that is what we were talking about with phrenology. And no, that's not a silly question because that was a common belief for a long period of time. There's no conclusive evidence that indicates that somebody with a deformed head is any more intelligent than somebody with a regular, whatever, normal size, and what's normal. But yeah, there's no correlation between brain or skull size or skull formation and intelligence. It's just how the brain develops, either through culture, through values, through nutrition. There are environmental factors and genetic factors alike are what help form intelligence and emotions and behaviors. Okay, that was a good question. That was not silly.
Thank you.
All right, good job with frontal lobe. All right, what else? I know we're kind of running up on time here. What else do we, I think we're on group 6. What did you have?
We have the parental lobes. They're located, I'm sorry.
Parietal lobe, yep, okay.
Yeah, they're located at the top and back of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much what they do is they are in charge of your perceptions, like your touch perception, temperature, and it also keeps track of your body position. I think it has something to do kind of like your equilibrium, keeping you balanced.
Yeah. Part of your equilibrium, yes, that's in your hindbrain. And if you think of equilibrium and balance, was that your cool fact, by the way, or did you have something else?
No, the cool fact is that it seems like it's wired backwards. The top of the brain, the cells at the top actually manage all the sensors down towards the bottom of the body. So it's almost like it's flipped.
Okay. And let me offer an explanation for that. So if you notice right here, that pink spot, okay, that's your sensory motor. That's what gives you your, if you were to, everybody kind of do this right now, if you can. I promise I'm not going to do anything to you, but go ahead and close your eyes. And if you have enough space to do so, close your eyes and put your hands all the way out like you're a T. Okay. And then with your eyes closed, take your index finger and try and touch your other index finger in front of you, far out in front of you. Just swing around and try and touch your index finger. Okay. All right. I see some of you are successful in doing that. That is your parietal lobe at its best. Okay. That's what it's designed to do. That gives you an image. Even though you can't see, you still have a spatial recognition. You know where you are in time and space, and your balance. It's taking information from your hindbrain and your cerebellum, and it's telling you, this is where I am, these are where my arms are, and it's now talking to your frontal lobe with your motor cortex to be able to piece that together, okay? So that's the function of your parietal lobe, is to take in all the information around you, and it's closely located to your frontal lobe, so it can make decisions. And then based on those decisions, it uses that pink area, your sensory motor cortex, to execute motor functions, execute your physical response to your environment, okay? So pretty cool stuff, right? All right, next section, I think group 5. Group 5, you still with us?
We just finished group 6.
Oh, I'm sorry, 6, 7, group 7, thank you. Group 7. Maybe you forgot what group you're in. How about temporal lobes?
Yeah, that's me, group 8.
Okay. Oh, group 8. Okay.
Yeah. So that's behind the temples, and
Mhm.
it helps with language, learning, memory, and it processes like visual.
Absolutely. That's right. Okay. And what interesting fact did you come up with that?
So if somebody's like talking to us, we wouldn't be able to understand them if it
Mhm.
wasn't for the temporal lobe.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So where is the temporal lobe most closely located to the outside of our brain? Where is it located? Like if you looked at the outside of the brain, what do you see right with those temporal lobes?
I would say to the ears.
Your ears, right? Your ears. So that's your memory processing there. I'm sorry. Well, not only your memory, your language processing. It is co-located with your memory because remember where the hippocampus is, right next to those, right? So it all works together. People that have damage to the temporal lobes may lose memory. Memory. I keep saying memory because memory does happen. Alzheimer's is also implicated in the temporal lobes. But some people may lose their language ability either to understand it or to speak it. They may be able to hear and process and respond to people talking to them, but they may not be able to speak or come up with words. All right, so very important area of the brain. And again, look where it's located, near the frontal cortex, right? And the parental lobe and the occipital lobe, which we'll talk about here in a minute, okay? All right, good job. So group 7, I think you had occipital lobe, right?
Yes, we did. Sorry,
Okay.
it wasn't working.
That's okay. So what'd you find out about the occipital lobe?
So it's located at the base of your cortex, so at the back and rear portion of your brain. It manages your visual processing. So it manages what you are taking into what you're seeing. And a fun fact about it, if you have occipital lesions, they can actually lead to visual hallucinations.
Yes, absolutely. And hopefully we'll get some time to spend a lot of time. I like to talk about schizophrenia because schizophrenia is one of those weird disorders that it's not necessarily just mental health. Like, when we think of depression and we think of anxiety and we think of bipolar, all those things are usually those are behavioral functions, maybe sometimes misfiring of certain serotonin or dopamine neurotransmitters. But schizophrenia, we are now learning more and more that it's not necessarily a correctable function. We can't just teach somebody to do something to overcome negative features of schizophrenia, like hallucinations. These are actually firing neurons. And you're right, they sometimes appear in the occipital lobe. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more occipital lobe when we get into the next chapter as well, because that handles a lot of our visual cortex. But again, look where it's located, right behind the hindbrain, where that's our cerebellum, which is responsible for our balance, right? Our awareness, our spatial awareness as well. So when we close our eyes, people that are blind, and I think I have, and if I don't, I'm going to post it. I have a video of a guy named Daniel Kish, who was born blind, and he developed this this echolocation, which he makes clicking sounds, and based on those clicking sounds, he can tell you what's in the room, probably better than somebody with vision. All right, so he is activating his parietal lobe. His occipital lobe is still functioning, but he's using more of his hearing to produce sight. So he can see, just not in the sense of actually being able to see colors or see shapes. He can still see shapes, but just through hearing. So anyway, he's earned the name Batman. People call him Batman because he uses echolocation to do that stuff. So anyway, very cool stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a friend that based on your footstep, he can recognize who you are.
Oh.
Yeah, but he was totally blind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But based on your footstep, he would say, "Oh, welcome this guy." Oh, you say your name.
Okay. So yeah. So what he's doing is compensating. We talked about plasticity earlier. So we get in this mindset that if we don't have our sight, we lose everything, and that's absolutely untrue. And in fact, you gain other senses if you're not so focused, because we put a lot of energy into what we see and not necessarily what we feel and what we hear and what we smell. So when you lose one sense, you really enhance all your other ones, right? So really cool stuff. All right. So how did you all like that demonstration?
Super cool.
Cool. Thumbs up. I see thumbs up. All right. All right. Good. So really that's all I'm going to cover today. Now there's a lot of cool stuff in the reading about how we do imaging and look at the brain, and especially with brain dysfunction. And one fun little fact about, I heard it come up earlier, is Alzheimer's. You're all psychology students, at least for this semester. So one of your big takeaways is it's not called old timers. How many people have called it old timers before, or continue to do that? Don't be ashamed, okay? Because it's really not well known what Alzheimer's is, especially if you haven't had any family members afflicted with it. But yeah, believe it or not, I get a good portion of people that still call it old timers, but it's Alzheimer's, okay? Alzheimers. So one interesting thing about that is just that it's actually not diagnosable, formally diagnosable, until it's diagnosed posthumously, which means after death, because we can see areas of the brain that are affected through imaging, through functional MRIs and PET scans and CAT scans, but we can't necessarily see the cluster that occurs until somebody would have to dissect the brain in order to see those. Okay, so just a very interesting fact about that. All right, any questions on what we covered for now? I'll go into if we have any questions about the assignment or anything here in a bit, but any questions on what we covered today?
I have a question. I know that I feel like I was taught once before that your brain is also like right and left hemisphere. So like, what's the difference between like the lobes and then the hemisphere? Like, why is it different like that?
Good question. And I'm not going to bring this image back up, but you're right. We have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. And as I was showing you in those videos earlier, and you can go back and look, there's that crease that goes right down the middle of your brain. And that really is the dissection between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Between those hemispheres is something called your corpus callosum. Now, your corpus callosum is kind of like a fiber optics, if you will, between two computers, and it's just constantly it's a dense strand of fibers that constantly talks back and forth between your left brain and your right brain. Now, sometimes that corpus callosum has to be severed, either through, it might either happen through injury, or it might happen people that suffer from seizures. They found that, to me, it's, we continue to do this, but they sever the corpus callosum because it's a misfiring between the two brains that causes people to seize. So when that happens, some interesting things occur. Like your right brain doesn't know necessarily what your left brain is doing. So if you're doing something with your right, there was a famous case, and I don't think I have this video up either, of a woman that had seizures, and they severed her corpus callosum, and she could be talking to you, and then all of a sudden her left hand would start undressing herself. And she had no idea what it was doing. And she wasn't meaning to do that, but she had two different brain activities occurring. So yeah, that's a good point. Unfortunately, we didn't get a whole lot of time today to talk about that, but I thought it was really important to talk about the brain areas, okay? Maybe I should have assigned somebody the corpus callosum. That would have been an interesting conversation. All right, any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to comment something. I used to watch House a lot. And it's the show, it's a doctor kind of show. And they had cases like that too. And there was once a guy who got into like a car accident, and all of a sudden he was like a musical prodigy. But he couldn't do like anything by himself. He had to have his dad helping him a lot. But he could magically now play the piano. And it was, and then they said if he wanted to, like, I guess, quote, become normal, they would have to do a surgery, but he would never be able to play again.
Hmm.
I don't know. It was weird. It was a whole elaborate scene or something, but I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, no, that is cool. And what I'm just curious, how did it end? What did he elect? I'm sorry if this is a spoiler alert from anybody that's binge watching House. You can maybe just plug your ears.
In the end, the patient decided that he wanted to be normal instead of being a musical prodigy because he hadn't experienced that. I mean, I think he was like I forgot when the accident happened, but he was already an adult, and then he discovered that he can play, so he did that, but he didn't have a chance to be in his normal life again, so he ended up just getting the surgery.
Okay. Oh, that's no, that's a cool story, and there's probably a lot of truth to that. I don't know if that was a true case or not, but there are a lot of similar cases to that where part of your brain has picked up on something, and when that injury occurs or when that surgery occurs, it acts on its own or learns on its own. It's really, really interesting stuff. All right. Any other comments or questions before we talk about assignments and everything else that's due? All right. So just in the remaining few minutes here, I do want to just remind you, let me get into our class. So we have, this week, we have our quiz in week 2 is due. Our assignment, nature versus nurture. Hopefully, I've been receiving some emails that people weren't able to open the video. I'm able to see that. Is anybody else experiencing an issue opening that video?
Yes.
Okay, Pierre, you are? Anybody else?
Yeah, me too.
Okay, Brenton, anybody else? Has anybody been successful in opening nature versus nurture? Raise your hand. Okay. If you do, go ahead and post in D2L and I'll pick up on it. As far as I know, I mean, it's working fine on my end, so I don't know how to explain that. But if you can't, I think it's out on YouTube. You should be able to just type in nature versus nurture and bring it up that way. But again, post it on D2L and I'll figure that out. Also, your diagnostic is due. So let me share my screen. Your diagnostic is pretty straightforward. I don't think I need to spend a whole lot of time, but I did get some questions, so I certainly want to address that while we're here together. So your diagnostic, go ahead and fill this out. Oh, okay. So I can't just view it. Back to share my screen. Okay, I don't know where it went. All right, so your diagnostic is pretty simple. All you're going to do is fill out one of the 3 elections. I know a lot of you have emailed me already, just whether you have a group. Now, if you have a group put together that you want to work with people, it's okay if you don't have all of them, but understand I may be I will be filling in. I want to at least have no less than 4, no more than 5 people per group. Some of you may only have 4. I'll do my best to try and distribute the workload evenly. But anyway, pick out, if you have groups picked out, great. If you don't, just fill out that survey at the bottom. And also, even if you do pick your groups, fill out that survey. It's just very short, just answer the questions best. They don't have to be fully completed. You don't have to reference or anything. And then get back to me, send that back, and then I'll fit you into your groups. If you do not want to participate in the group project, let me know on that sheet. Go ahead and sign it, just so it just acknowledges that you understand that you will not be getting anything higher than a C for this course. But I know that's not gonna be the case, right? Everybody's gonna want to participate. I promise, like I said, I'm not gonna say we're not gonna have problems. Groups, sometimes things come up, but for the most part, I really haven't had to kick anybody out or remove them unless they want it to be. But hopefully that will not be the case here. All right, any questions for me on anything? How is everybody?
Yeah.
Everybody good with everything else?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to know what's actually due next class or next week.
I'm sorry, one more time.
I said I just want to know what is due next class or next week. That's all.
Next week, you should be able to get into week 3 and look that over. Just the assignment. I'm going to be working next week to put you into your groups. So by the end of the week, you'll know what groups you're in.
All right.
Yep. But by Sunday, have all that stuff turned in Sunday midnight, and then next week will be week 3. Monday we'll start week 3. Okay. But you should be able to see all that. What's going to be doing when.
All right.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I know you're talking about payback only lets you in a certain like time. I was trying yesterday and today and I can't seem to get in. It's like reset my whole thing saying that like I need an email, even though I just did it last week and I was in it.
Okay, interesting.
It like shows the class like name and everything, but then it says you're not part of this class anymore.
Okay, really?
Yeah, I don't know why.
And did you email Packback? You emailed them and told them what's happening?
I sent an email. I just have to wait for the response, but I only sent it a little bit ago.
Okay, do me a favor. Email them again and CC me. Put me, courtesy copy me or carbon copy, just so I can be in the loop. And if you don't hear anything back, I'll get on them because it's important that you have access to that. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. And by the way, everybody has been doing great in Packback. I did great. I looked through them and graded them yesterday. So good job with that. Now, this upcoming week, it's going to be a little bit different. I know many of you were just, some of you went above and beyond and did your own question and answered other people's, and that's fantastic. I'm glad you got that practice. So for next week, everybody's going to be doing that. You're going to be coming up with your own question this week, pertaining to the brain, the biological perspective, any questions you have, and then go through and answer 2 of those by Sunday midnight. Okay. All right. I'm going to hang back for just a couple minutes here in case any of you need some one-on-one. But thank you for your attention today. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you back here on Monday.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Yep,
Monday's Labor Day.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You're right. Okay, I'll send an email out. Yeah. So we will not be meeting on Monday. Okay, thank you for pointing that out, Mitch. That would have been a disaster.
No class Monday?
What's that?
No class Monday?
No class on Monday. I'll send an email out because a lot of people just jumped off and I said, see you Monday. Okay, so thank you, Mitch.
Thank you.